Everyone. I'll be doing a short talk about PHRN's Aggregate Data Access project. And the slides we prepare are very detailed, but I'll keep the story brief and leave some room for a quick demo of the wireframe or address any feedback or questions that you may have, and also to have a quick discussion around the next steps. Having said that, the slides do have the details, and we are happy to take questions offline once you've had the opportunity to digest the summary that we produced. The primary aim of this project was to deliver a service blueprint that enables access to linked aggregate data for the therapeutic development sector in order to facilitate and expedite clinical trials. And we have two deliverables as part of this project. We were asked to deliver a service blueprint for which we engaged a company called Future Friendly, and we worked in consultations with Queensland, AHW, and PHRN as well. And the second component was to create a prototype of an aggregated request and see how it can be serviced from an operational perspective. The timing was impeccable. The National Research Infrastructure Roadmap for 2021 and our Future Health Strategic Framework, they both emphasize on accelerating the engagement with the therapeutics area and investment in digital innovations in the research domain. So this project gave us an opportunity to engage with the industry without disclosing highly sensitive linked unit record data without consent. So this is the primary aim of this project, and how did we achieve this was in terms of a tri-speed approach of investigate, develop, prototype. So we investigated the preconditions and governance arrangements that would enable us to deliver the service, at least in one Australian jurisdiction. We then developed a service blueprint, which can be scaled or implemented across PHRN. We also prototyped or did some user testing specific for industry requests as well. New South Wales chaired this project, but this was a collaborative piece with PHRN, Cheryl, Data Linkage Queensland, and AHW, and we all worked very closely together in stitching the deliverables in compressed time frames. So we had 7 weeks to define, design, and test the skin wireframes. And the slide talks about the first 2 components of investigate and development. So we understood the needs and challenges and enablers from the therapeutic industry, and we tried to define an ideal service model. Now, in doing so, the ideal stage of the service model needed a roadmap implementation. This is so that you can have small pockets of iterative testing, and then learning from each stage can take you towards your ideal service model. And we've described the roadmap a bit more towards the end of the slides. This is the third component around the prototyping or the user testing. So as part of this exercise, we did some user testing with a sample of client base from the research and therapeutic sector. And overall, the feedback was quite positive, where there is a lot of enthusiasm in the client base to get access to linked aggregate data. And there was also strong indications from customers who were willing to pay for the service. We had a spectrum of feedback where some participants had a very clear view of how they would use the linked aggregate data. They could use it for estimating the size of their cohort or doing a feasibility study before they formally design a data linkage study. Whereas in some cases, we also had questions around a need for more granular unit record level data sets for clinical purposes, and we had to take a step back and help them understand the scope of this project. So the slide essentially talks about the gist of feedback that we received from various stakeholders. This is a snapshot of our service delivery blueprint. And again, the blueprint is categorized into 3 main areas. So there's a starting phase where a researcher socializes themselves with what data collections are available, what governance mechanism is available, what approvals do you need, and how do you onboard yourself? How do you build up a profile? How long it takes for you to place the request and for you to channel through each steps. And there are also some case studies and tutorials that would be made available when the prototype is implemented, just so that it gives an opportunity for the end user to get acquainted with this whole concept of linked aggregate data. The second phase is a build phase, where a researcher can use a self-led approach to actually request the linked aggregate data component. And you can see there are guidance in place and there are tooltips in place that would help provide some contextual information around the data collection and the utility around it. The tool also had an opportunity to do some sort of self-evaluation, so that before you submit the request, you have an opportunity to preview it so that you can see what you've requested, and you also have an opportunity to see what the output would look like, so that you can make some changes if it doesn't meet your expectations. The last part is managing. So once a request has been placed, there is an opportunity for the researcher to be able to track their request and provide some feedback on the request submissions. This also gives us an opportunity to streamline future interactions with the same researcher. So that's the gist of the service blueprint. What I might do is I might also share the actual, I'll give a demo of what the actual blueprint looked like. Just give me a sec. I'll just stop sharing this one, and I might have to change my screen so that I can point it to the right browser. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. So that's the blueprint, the service skinned wireframe that we were provided with. And so it starts with the starting phase where you're socializing the concept, and it helps a researcher understand what is it that they need to do in order to service this request. So there's the definition of the study population, you choose your comparison factors, you review, submit, and track your request, and then you access your cohort profile. And it also gives a tentative window of how long this whole request would take. And that exploratory phase also has this concept of getting used to the data collections. So it gives a sense around what data sets are available for linked aggregate releases, and how can you use them, or in what context can you use them. So the inpatient hospital data has these many themes around the diagnosis, episode of care, and there's a data dictionary that's available that they can click and understand the collection further. The next step is around the building of this request. So when you start building this request, it gives you an indicative summary of how long each activity should take, and what are the limitations, and what is the output that you would receive. So you would get a three-way tabulation that would allow you to assess your cohort population. There's also an opportunity to check the governance and eligibility criteria. So once a researcher is understood, once a request is understood, they can start building the request. Now, the tool actually provides some context around the request as well, so that it can help the requester navigate through the correct paths. So it asks you to describe the intended use of this data. It could either be planning a site collection for a clinical trial, or conducting a feasibility study, or identifying a population health gap. So if they select, so certain things are pre-populated, they have the opportunity to then further refine the request around the time period of the population and the characteristics of the cohort. Then they get to select their comparison factors in the three-way cross-tabulation. So they can select the themes. So it could either be episode of care based, or diagnosis based, or outcomes based, or facility LHD based. So when they select the factor around diagnosis, again, they can click on the diagnosis code that would then allow them to do a further selection around from the expansive list of X diagnosis, what is it that you're actually interested in? And they can make their selections. And if they're happy with it, they can confirm that the first factor has been selected. The second factor could be a distribution of facility types or the local health districts. And once that has been selected, they can move on to the third factor. They've pre-populated the third factor, which is the contributing cause of death. So this step allows them to view some case studies and existing case studies, and it also gives them an opportunity to review their request. So they can have a look at what they've requested, and they can also view a sample of the output that they would receive. So this is a three-way tabulation across LHDs and diagnosis codes for certain cardiac arrest criteria, and the third factor is the contributing cause of death. The tool also provides some insights around what level of complexity is the project at. So this is a medium complexity. It gives some further intel around, look, if you really want this to be a quick turnaround, you can refine some of your variables so that it decreases the time estimates. Because I think the two main factors, the two main feedback were around predictability around the request, and is there a way to configure the request so that they can get some timely outputs as well. And once they are ready to submit, they have this mechanism to start tracking their request, and it gives a lot more other it gives a holistic view around where the project is at and how they can track their projects. So that's the skinned wireframe that we prepared, and this was our first deliverable. The second component of this project was actually so there were some conclusions and recommendations from this project as well, and this is the roadmap that I was talking about earlier. One of the conclusions that we had was this: it's a big piece. Before you establish yourself with a proper service delivery model, it's important to test the approach first with a small set of client base, with a simple request, and then gradually take it further. So the recommendation was for us to do a pilot, and do a pilot with a lightweight protocol with real customers from industry, so that you can get a sense, you can read the requirement and understand how we can service them. The second was a three-stage approach where you create a set of standard aggregate requests, simple set of standard aggregate requests that once the researcher is able to request them, and you've got a set of collections that could be used for these releases, and there's a set timeline around it. The third one was to build a capability, which means a self-led tool, and that empowers the researchers to request some bespoke linked data requests. And it also included some sort of an automation and development around having a tool that is robust enough to capture that information. And the third one, which would be our ideal stage, would be to have a scaled and automated approach where you have categories of services that are requested with a quicker turnaround. You have a mechanism to service them better with some automations in place, while also keeping room for some bespoke work that you would have to do. We did not draw a time frame for each of these horizons, but we kind of anticipated each one might take 3 to 6 months, depending on how complex this piece is. The second part was prototyping a service request. So the service blueprint, the skinned wireframe, gives you a sense around how operationally you can start working on these requests. But we also wanted to work on the feasibility and utility component of this project, which meant we wanted to actually create an aggregated data set using linked data and understand, for us to deliver this, what are the governance mechanisms that we would need, and what time period is acceptable and what nuances we would come across. It was more of a practical approach to just do a quick trial run of this. We had some consultations and we received some expression of interest, and we selected one project from a researcher who was mainly interested in elective surgery admissions. The operational approach was to streamline the data governance first. So we sought ethics approval for inclusion of 4 key data sets: the birth, deaths, and marriages, admitted patient data collection, emergency, and the perinatal data collection into our linked aggregate data service model. And the ethics approval was very crisp around the output of this service delivery path, where we were not allowed to release anything that is more granular than a 3-way cross-tabulated data set. Any small cell values like 5 or under should be suppressed. We should not report on indigenous status, and our geographical level should be granular at an SA2, LG or higher. We also saw data custodian's approval to do this, and we also ironed out a pathway for us to formally start releasing these data sets in case if a request like this comes into play, and we agreed that a formal disclosure can be done by seeking approval from our exec director. This is an example of, it's a template of the output that our integration team created. So it's a tabulated output with the information that the researcher was essentially after. And this also gives a view around 10 timeframes or acceptable timeframes that the team would like to work with. We also created an issue log. And the purpose of this issue log was, as we embarked on this journey, we noticed there are nuances in the data sets that has to be captured, which would at some stage become important to socialize with the requester so that they understand the challenges and limitations associated with these data sets. And it also gave us a sense around what key indicators should you clarify before you start before you commence work on this request. The conclusions and recommendations we had were, yes, this is possible. Yes, there's an appetite to, yes, there's an appetite in the therapeutic sector and research sector to receive these linked aggregate data sets and use them in their context. We also the next stage probably would involve Data Linkage Queensland, who partnered with us in this project to replicate the prototype and see if they're able to create similar data sets, or are there nuances in collections within jurisdictions that would restrict the creation of linked data assets or refine the variables that we include. The next step is socializing the concept, and we kind of kept the slide blank because we wanted to use this platform as a discussion forum to see how we can carry through the next steps of this project, and also if we can, if there are ideas around how we can start engaging our stakeholders, both external and internal, around this concept, and how should we work towards a plan of operationalizing this model in a short-term, medium-term, long-term fashion. A special thanks to our PCG, the Future Friendly team, the consultancy firm that we used for the skin wireframes, Professor Stephen Webb, who was involved in the researcher request, and our industry participants. It was a team effort, and it was a good journey, and there were a lot of things that we learned over the course of our interaction with both research and industry as well.